and lunch meat and chips, cookies for dessert. So we'd love for you to stay. And then this afternoon at 1:30, we will have Sophia Syed, who is our Muslim sister who will come and speak to us about the Muslim faith. And I can't wait. I've met Sophia. All of us that have met Sophia just love her. And so I hope you'll be able to stay for that. But right now it's my honor and my privilege to introduce Jay Bakker, who I watched grow up on the PTL club. And this little pudgy guy. And it was such a privilege the first time he came to Open Door. And Gary and I love him just like a son. And he is just such a joy to our lives. And he's been through a really rough patch. And we're so glad that he is back. And we've been for you the whole time. We love you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Always glad to be back at the invisible pulpit. Yeah, a little smudge or two. You can see it now. Yes, Peggy had mentioned if I had time to talk about my kids, and I always have time to talk about my kids. I have a 5-year-old boy named Milo Rudolph Bakker, and I have a 2-year-old named Minnie, short for Amelia Faye Bakker, and they are my life. They are amazing 2 little kids. I have them about 50-60% of the time. And we have so much fun together, and my son, Milo, is like me. He is sensitive and sweet and cries and brings me a special stuffed animal whenever he's at my house at night and say, Papa, I'm going to make sure you sleep with this, and then half the time he ends up in the bed with me. And Amelia is like her mother, tough as nails. She falls down, she gets right back up, you know. The other day, Milo fell and scratched his knee and was just crying and crying. Minnie ran up to him and just hugged him and said, I'm sorry, Milo. You know, and Milo's like, I'm not mad at you, Minnie. I'm mad at the ground. And I've been blessed with 2 beautiful babies. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably know that already. If you don't follow me on Instagram because I love it. And it's a little bit nicer than Twitter, unless of my family's fans on Facebook. So, because you never know what you're going to get, you can see their beautiful faces because they are beautiful kids. I see my mother in Minnie so much. She's got blue eyes, and she's got 2 parents with brown eyes, and so, you know, just like a little angel. And so, yeah. But, so, I've got a 2-parter today. Aren't you happy? Hope you're not that hungry. I'm going to just kind of do my monologue. My monologue is going to be just, why isn't Jay here last year? A year ago, yesterday, it's strange how I can't remember what I ate yesterday, but how your unconscious, which is not supposed to let you know what's going on, but does weird things to you, reminds you of really bad anniversaries. Like, I'll wake up sometimes on the anniversary of my mother's death, and I'll just be crying and not know why, and then all of a sudden someone will send me a text or something and be like, I'm thinking about you today, you know, and you realize it. A year ago yesterday, I had to tell the love of my life that we had to separate because we just didn't get along anymore. We weren't loving each other anymore. Didn't mean we didn't love each other, but we just didn't love on each other anymore. And the marriage was over. And it was devastating. Now, I've spent most of my life suffering from depression and panic attacks, and it's been a lifelong struggle for me. And that day, a year ago yesterday, was the beginning of me going through hell. I read a quote sometime that said, if you're going through hell, walk through it like you own the place. Problem is hell is full of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't believe in a literal burning fire hell underground or in some other area, whatever, some other universe or something. Brendan Manning once, I asked Brendan Manning, I said, do you believe in hell? And he's like, of course I believe in hell. I was like, oh. He's like, but I believe it's empty. So I was like, I love how we used to do stuff like that back then, play your cards really close to your chest. But I had a mental break. And when I mean mental break, I mean I've had 2 marriages fall apart since I've been here. My mother passed away and died. Since I've been here, Randy did my mother's funeral. So less than a year ago, I decided I was done, and I took a bottle full of sleeping pills, and I was done. Now, I have some shame towards that, and people say, oh, don't have shame, but the shame comes with when I think of my 2 little ones. But when I see people suffering through suicide, I understand when they have whole families. There was just a young man who has helped people through depression and stuff who was more evangelical, who just successfully killed himself. And he had 2 little ones. And, people, oh, what a selfish bastard, And I go, no. When you're in the midst of mental health issues, you just don't weigh those options anymore. I mean, I thought my children were going to be way better off without me. People say, how could you think that? Well, I'm a mentally ill person. That's how I could think that. So I tried to kill myself. I woke up in the hospital. Grateful that I failed at that. I'm grateful to be here. But I've learned to learn life on life's terms. I've learned so many valuable lessons this past year. I've always not been afraid of confrontation publicly. I've always been able to confront publicly. But privately, in my own life, I have not liked confrontation. I've avoided it. Conflict avoidance at all cost. And that was a part of my marriage falling apart. It was because I just thought, well, if I avoid the conflict, everything will be okay. And that was not the fact. But through this year and through my friendship with people like Peter Rollins, I've learned to embrace suffering, and I had to. There was like the choice of die or embrace it, and I got electric shock therapy. I did DBT, I did EMDR, went through a lot of different therapies, and what I've learned through a lot of that is to embrace life on life's terms. I used to hear that a lot in my 12-step group, live life on life's terms, and I don't know if I quite understood what they were saying. A quote from my buddy, my best friend in the world, Peter Rollins, says, "Grace is freedom from the pursuit of happiness." Imagine if we actually always lived that way. But we're taught to, freedom is the pursuit of happiness. No, grace is the freedom from the pursuit of happiness. And so I lived, and I lived my life, and I've discovered something. I've discovered life before death. And I'm not the man I used to be. And I'm grateful for the people that stuck with me, reached out to me, and stood with me. It was a small group, but I'm grateful for them. And I had a Job experience. I had the people who told me to quit and give up and do other things. Honestly, if I would have listened to some of them, I'd be stocking shelves right now. And unfortunately, I listened to my other buddy and just said, I'm going to jump feet first back into the ministry and do what I love and what I've always done. And that's where I am today. So I'm grateful for that. So, now for part 2. That was your update on Jay. If you have questions, you can ask me later. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Luke 10. Still use a Bible. I think I'm the only one in my church that has a Bible. Honestly. Luke 10:25 says, just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And I love it when it puts equally as important. This one doesn't, but it says, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, then who is my neighbor? So then Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Now the funny thing is about this story is the Samaritan was this man's enemy. To the point at the end, when Jesus says, who showed the most grace, he said, the one that showed him mercy. And it's funny he doesn't say the Samaritan. Like the lawyer's like, I'm not even going to say the Samaritan. I'm just going to say the one who showed him mercy. But that is, who is my neighbor? Your enemy is your neighbor. And Matthew 5:4. Is it 5:4? Oh, no, it's not 5:4. All right, it's 5:44. Sorry. Dyslexia. It's better that I at least wrote it down. It's really bad when you write down the wrong thing and then you're just like, oh, this verse has nothing to do with what I'm preaching. Oh, God, I've been there. It's a nightmare. And I don't memorize anything. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your enemies and hate your enemy. And then Jesus goes on to say, but I say to you, love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. We have lost this. We don't do this. I don't even know what we do with grace anymore because we don't show it anymore. And when I say we, I mean we. We have forgotten how to love our enemies. Well, at least those of us online have. And a lot of our best progressive minds have, to the point where I will not call myself a progressive anymore. I'm done with that road for now. If I'm anything, I'm probably more of an anarchist. But what do we do with grace? Is we have to learn that we all have contradictions in our lives. We're all full of contradictions. One of the things I'm afraid of, and is that we've become what we hate that we've become the very thing that made us end up in the little purple room or in seeking out safe spaces. We've lost the fact that we all live in contradiction. Hegel's philosophy of contradiction, says Todd McGowan says, deprives the subjects of their enemy, which also deprives them of their image of self-identity. So when we live in contradiction and we realize that contradiction is part of life, and you can realize that you live in contradiction, and that will not change the contradiction. You will always be in contradiction. We will always have contradiction. Contradiction is a part of life. My mother was probably one of the greatest living contradictions ever. When Chris Christopherson wrote about and talked about Johnny Cash, he said he was a walking contradiction, partly truth, partly fiction. It's just life is full of contradictions. Grace is embracing the contradictions of life for ourselves and others. Now, how is this? Sometimes I'll see some of my not neo-Calvinists, oops, Freudian slip. My neo-atheist friends be like, well, how, this guy on death row all of a sudden killed all these people and then accepts Jesus and he's just forgiven, and that's just not fair. I'm like, yep, you're right, it's not fair. That's grace. Grace is always for those we don't want it to be for. Grace is always for the other. Grace embraces contradictions of life. So when we forgive our enemies, even when they're not asking for forgiveness, it's a type of contradiction. Well, I don't want your forgiveness. That's okay, I'm forgiving you anyway. Well, I'm still going to hurt you. That's okay, I'm going to forgive you anyway. It's a contradiction that we live in. So I'm worried that we often too find our self-identities tied to what we disagree with. And what I'm afraid we have become, and what's happened to us, is we've started to scapegoat conservatives. And we've started to scapegoat people who support the president. And it is an easy thing to do. When I was a very young boy, I saw scapegoating firsthand by the left and the right. When my parents had their scandal and Jim and Tammy fell, it was though every bit of anger towards every televangelist and every church person that had done someone wrong was all of a sudden aimed and focused on these folks. Scapegoat. Hey, Abraham was going to kill his son, and then God provided a goat, and there was the scapegoat. Well, Jim and Tammy fell, and, we don't like Jerry Falwell, but Jerry Falwell didn't fall, and we didn't like Jimmy Swaggart, and it took him about a year to fall. Or Pat Robertson, who's still alive at the time. And all these other preachers, and we don't like them. And so these folks fell, and I watched, and I'm going way back here, folks. Johnny Carson made fun of my parents. Saturday Night Live did it. The liberals had a great time. The liberal media hated my parents. Guess what, though? So did the conservative media. I would go as a boy and sit in churches and hear preachers use my parents as examples of what not to be. And the shame of that. I didn't see restoration. I didn't see forgiveness. I didn't see a lot of grace. I saw a few people, but not a lot. And I saw scapegoating. Now, this is why I think about this. And this is why I ask the question, have we become what we hate? And are we doing exactly what drove us away? Are we using the same rhetoric, the one that caused us to be where we're at today? Have we lost the art of disagreeing well? there's this new term I keep hearing about called canceling, and it's online, and it's basically anytime, some celebrity says something wrong or has done something bad, they've been canceled. They're done. They said something in their past, and we don't want to hear about it anymore. So we cancel them. And I think it's so easy to just write people off, and I used to go to these Christian festivals, and I also worked at a Christian television station once, and I remember that I used to do this to get a rise out of them. I've never voted for a Republican in my life, ever. I am a lifelong Democrat, okay? But and this was before I could vote. I would wear a Trump Gore shirt to my Christian television station thing, and they watched the hosts and stuff. Oh, because like, he's the Antichrist. They're the Antichrist. You can't be a Christian and vote for Donald Trump. And I'm like, well, I'm 16, I can't vote, so I just wear the shirt to piss you off. Oh, I can't do that. Those aren't God. He's not a godly man. And, it probably wasn't really a godly man. I don't know a lot of godly men or women, or at least what the idea of godly meant. But they were the scapegoat. And we saw the same thing with Obama. I didn't ever think there would be a time where I longed for George W. But I kind of do. Wouldn't mind him back. I'd trade him out. He's still around, isn't he? Painting somewhere. Come on, folks. You watch TV? No, but I feel like we don't realize that there are people out there who vote for their needs and not others' needs, who feel that they're not represented, didn't feel like Hillary could represent them, and felt like they maybe didn't want to support universal health care, or didn't want to support this, or didn't want to support that, and so they voted the other way. And we don't empathize with them. Now, when I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary, I hate talking about all this voting crap, but I'm just telling you, I didn't vote because I felt like Hillary backed out on health care a long time ago and got bought out. So I didn't like that. So I voted for somebody else. And there were other people who were Bernie fans who voted for Trump. I don't understand that, but they did. But I've watched my progressive brothers and sisters slowly starting writing articles like, you can't be a Christian and support Donald Trump. People who are part of an organizations that I were a part of. And I said, I even text the guy. I said, hey, are we doing the same thing that they did to us? And well, no, Jay, you don't understand. Blah 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 blah. One of the speakers who was here one year, I watch on social media all the time, and he just can't stand any conservatives, and just throws them out. And I was honestly horrified that he might be here this year. He's not. Not horrified, but just like, I'm going to have a conversation. And I've asked him if we're doing the same thing. We go to shaming on social media. And I just don't understand that I am at the point in my career where I go, how can I honestly stand and sit in my pulpit and stand here, and when I used to sit in front of people and say, please pray for your president, President Clinton, when I was there, and when Obama was there, and I would say, we need to pray for our president, we need to think differently, we need to do this, and then all of a sudden go like, but this new guy is crazy, don't pray for him. Now, I don't know if you guys know, my dad makes these Trump coins. There are pictures of, these are coins with a picture of Trump and Jesus on it. I also don't know if you know that my dad is a gigantor Trump supporter, to the point where we barely have conversations. But one of the things I was thinking about is maybe we need Trump coins. Maybe we need to have one in our pocket because maybe we should be praying for Donald Trump. Now, I don't pray anymore very often. Sometimes I pray in the shower. I don't pray a whole lot like I used to. But the point is not I'm saying this is something that we literally need to do. The point is this is something we need to think about. Is the Trump supporter, are the conservatives my brothers and my sisters? I'm going to go here, and I took a picture of this quote. Does anybody know who Dave Chappelle is? Yes. Okay. Dave Chappelle wrote, this is another thing, is I watched the Dave Chappelle special, and a lot of my progressive brothers and sisters were very angry about it, especially because of some of the stuff he said about LGBTQ folks. And I thought, we're normalized. This is part of the normalization of this is everyday life. We're living in everyday life. I thought it was funny and hilarious, and I'm actually going to have a discussion on a podcast that I'm starting with a friend of mine who's a comedian who does not agree with me on that one at all, and we're going to discuss it and work it out and see where I'm wrong. Because I usually am. But Dave Chappelle says this: our culture has accepted two huge lies. The first is that if you disagree with someone's lifestyle, you must fear or hate them. I've been guilty of that. The second is that to love someone means you agree with everything they believe, say, or do. Both are nonsense. You don't have to compromise convictions to be compassionate. Now, who knew this better than anybody was this Baptist minister from down south named, he was a doctor, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, seemed to have this one figured out. And it would always say, people aren't my enemy. They're victims of misinformation. And so I've tried to see people as victims of misinformation and not my enemies. And I've tried to love my enemies and do good to those who persecute me, and persecute also, this is the hardest part, and this was the hardest part growing up, is not persecuting people when they persecute those you love. But instead, going back to my progressive brothers and sisters and saying, are we sure we're doing the right thing here? Are you sure we're saying the right thing here? And trying to hold them accountable now. Life evolves, life goes on. You know? Are we throwing other people under the bus? The New York Times is doing an article with me, maybe. We've done this thing, but I've said I refuse to throw my father under the bus, and I refuse to scapegoat conservatives. I'm just not going to do it. I've got to take responsibility for my own self and my own work, and I said, we liberals have to take responsibility for our own mistakes and realize that, you know what, we're part of the reason that Trump got voted in. I mean, look at it now. Look how discombobulated we are. I was hoping that one of the things that would bring us all together were children in cages and children being separated from their families. I have gone online and said to my conservative brothers and sisters and to my progressive brothers and sisters, can this unite us? And it seems I'm getting kind of a firm no back. And it's amazing because I still get very upset when some of my people are like, well, I don't want my taxes to go towards that. And I'm like, toothbrushes and beds and things like that. I mean, that drives me crazy. And it makes me want to just go, okay, I understand why everybody wants to move left and get progressive and say, these are the bad people and we're the good people. But that's just too simple of a way to live. How do me and my father even communicate? I'm going to go to Missouri for Christmas. A few years ago on the phone when we talked, we both made a decision with each other that we would decide that love would be our main focus. We would love each other no matter what. Now, I get people telling me constantly, when are you going to set your father straight? You have to hold him accountable. You have to do this. I'm like, do you know? I mean, he's like a 79-year-old man. He's kind of stuck in his ways. He's my dad. Could you change your dad? And my therapist tells me to tell him to just screw off. And I don't want to do that. I try to have conversations with people and see what they're thinking. And I understand where they're coming from. I mean, I was recently informed that my dad talks to Trump. I didn't know that. Informed by a newspaper. And it's just, what I'm saying is his life isn't simple. Taking up your cross is really tough. And it's really, the easy road is to scapegoat. You know, when I say, you know, we're doing the same things that the conservatives did to us 10, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of what I get back is, but Jay, were you right? And I'm like, do you not think they said the exact same thing? And I get it. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. But I'm just saying, I think we've gotten to a society where progressiveness has become toxic. It's become like we've become like conservative Christians. One of my favorite writers who writes a lot about mental health went on a huge rant against conservatives. And my only thought was, do conservatives not suffer from mental illness too? Are conservatives not suicidal as well? And we've forgotten how to argue well and disagree well. I mean, when people told me that when I started a few months ago, I was online, and one of the reasons I honestly started this thing, this hashtag about 5 or 6, no, maybe longer than that, 8 years ago, Are You Gay Affirming, was honestly because of my friend Shane Claiborne, because I felt like he was not open enough about it, and he loved everybody else but wouldn't open up for my LGBTQ brothers and sisters. Fast forward 8 years, and people are protesting him. And then I started to go, wait a second, do we not have time for people's evolution? Do we not recognize the work that Shane Claiborne does for the death penalty? And for rifles? Shane has more money than me. Good for him. Somehow his career survived. I don't know. But do we not realize he was the one reaching out to Franklin Graham saying, will you guys work with me so that we can help these kids at the border? I wanted to do that, but Franklin Graham wouldn't take my phone call. Now, is Shane where I want him to be on LGBTQ issues? Has he said exactly what I want him to say? No. Has he said some positive things more than he has before? Yes. Have I reached out to him personally? Yes. Has he reached out to me personally recently? Yes. I don't think he wouldn't mind us sharing any of this with him. We've been friends who've been going through this little rub for a long time. He's a good man. So do I discount his work because he hasn't evolved where I'm at? Do we not allow for people's evolution? Okay, what was the guy who wrote the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Anybody know his name? Josh Harris. Okay, he just got divorced. He kissed marriage goodbye. But he also came out, and he also said he wasn't a Christian anymore. And I got a lot of people sending me messages saying, I'm really angry at Josh Harris. I'm so upset. I'm so mad, and blah, blah, blah. And I saw a lot of people be like, good for him. He gets what he deserves and all this. And I go, he has evolved to a place where he denounced a book that he wrote when he was 23 years old that hurt a lot of people and was really a bad message. And if people would have just listened to me when I was 23, I was saying, don't read this guy's book. But you didn't. But the fact is I'm like, well, one, you read the damn book and accepted it as truth. But two, he has repented, but we refuse to give him grace, and we enjoy in his suffering. That's just not Christianity. And I'm not saying like Jesus was my personal savior. I'm just like, if you follow Jesus as an example, or the Apostle Paul as an example, and I don't believe the pastoral epistles should be in the Bible, so I'm not going to include those. I believe they're forgeries. But, and that comes from reading a lot of really boring books. But if you believe these things, then we need to forgive people. I recently saw this picture online of a guy who had an SS tattoo, and then the next picture was covered with a dragon and some sort of bird fighting, and the tattoo artist wrote redemption and forgiveness and moving on with life. But his guy's face wasn't in the picture, and rightfully so, because we have become a society that holds things in the past against people, and we don't allow for growth and evolution. And one thing I'm trying to think of as when I think about Martin Luther King Jr. is that when I start seeing the dream come true and people repenting for what they've done and changing, I want to celebrate that. The time for shaming is over. Guess what? Grace is a hard deal. Grace is forgiveness. Someone did something crappy. They're saying, I'm sorry. The basics of Christianity, of that faith, is saying, okay, that's it. You know, when these guys are coming out left and right now for the therapy, what was it called? Reparative therapy, conversion therapy, which I thought was one of the most dangerous, craziest things ever. But a lot of them are coming out saying we didn't know what we were talking about. It was horrible. It was just... We forgive them, but a lot of them are being shamed. You know, it's not enough that they're being written off by all their conservative brothers and sisters, but then we come along saying, whoa, well, we're progressive thinkers, and we think great like this, but you should have never done that, and shame on you, and you're bad, and blah, blah, blah. I would not treat my children like that when they come to me and say, I'm sorry, Papa. Well, you shouldn't have done that. You should have, you know, okay, all right. Well, maybe we'll sit down and say, do you know why you did what was, you know, do you know what you did? You know, yeah, you know. And we talk about it, and then we move on, and we live life, and I love my kids. Well, that's how I'm supposed to love others. You know, I could blame my whole marriage falling apart on my wife. I could make a case for it right now. But thank God I have people like my buddy friend Pete Rollins who goes, well, Jay, you did this, you didn't do this. Oh, yeah, that's right. I played a part in it. And I accept my personal responsibility for what I did. You know, it's just so easy to scapegoat people and blame everybody. And I'm afraid that there is going to be no room for reformation. There is going to be no room for this because the church is going to be dead because a kingdom divided will fall. And if we continue with the same rhetoric. Now, this is another thing. I want to point out a hypocrisy that I've been practicing. As I've been talking a lot about these kids in cages and them not getting water and them not getting the right clean water, not getting this and not getting that, and someone says to me, well, what about kids in the, my medication sometimes that I'm on makes me forget words, in the foster system here in this country. Now, this is like, you know, and I'm like, well, I don't think about just this country. I think about the globe because I'm an all-loving, compassionate liberal. Well, there's, 1,500 to 2,000 children at the border being held. There's 7,000 people in the, I just said it, in the foster care system. And a lot of those kids are being given to people who don't really take care of them and are taking advantage of them, often sexually abusing them, physically abusing them, and doing things like that. But we don't talk about that. And why don't we talk about that? Is because it's not in the media. I mean, for God's sake, Trump had a rally and they said, send them back, and all of a sudden we forgot that there were kids in cages. Because now Trump's racist. There's kids in cages, folks, dying, being left in buses for 20 hours, and we're getting mad over a chant, and I'm thinking, is this guy smart, maybe? Does he just be like, well, I'll just say something else stupid, and they'll just all think over here. All these people are killed with rifles. Well, I'll just say this, and then we'll all focus on this and get there. And we just do boom, 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 boom. We're all like ADD, you know? Squirrel, squirrel, what, you know? And we've forgotten how to focus on what's important. But we've also forgotten, and the reason I mentioned the kids who are here going through foster care is because, do we really give a damn? Or do we just give a damn about what's in front of us and what's in the media? You know, do we really care about people? Do we really care about suffering children? I was debating with a Trump supporter the other day, because I still do. And they go, do you know that so far, and we might be not far from war right now, but so far we haven't had any new wars. And I didn't Google it, so I don't know if it's true or not. But I was like, well, no, I really didn't know that. There's not thousands of young men dying on battlefields. But we don't talk about that because we have a very selective way of thinking and seeing things, because we want to be progressive and we want them to be conservative, we want to be good, and they are bad. And we can't say anything positive about the other person. Matter of fact, I'd mentioned this to another one of my friends, and I was like, do you know if this is true? I'm just wondering. And they said to me, well, it's probably because his rich friends wouldn't get any money from it and do all this kind of stuff. And then, and all of a sudden it was like, well, there's a bad reason behind it because it can't be a good reason. So his motives have got to be screwy, and that's why they're not going to war, because he doesn't own stock in, whatever. I am just so tired of the fighting, and so tired of us writing each other off, and so tired of the fact that we can't argue well. We're talking about the same table, being at the same table, and that it's not our table, it's not their table. I don't give a damn whose table it is. But we sit at a table and we argue well. Usually King was going to their tables and arguing well and showing them with respect and compassion. And when he was talking to them, he wasn't just being like, oh, you guys shamed a bunch of my friends on social media. No, you hung a bunch of my friends. You threw a fiery cocktail through my window and nearly burned my children to death. And he's sitting there saying, I'm still going to talk to you. I'm still going to look at you with love in my eyes. I'm still going to respect you. And I'm still going to have this conversation. We all are human beings. I live with Somalians, and they're very, very ostracized group in Minneapolis, but there's a huge population of Somalians in Minneapolis. And they're just people. We're human beings going through a human experience. My wife was the primary breadwinner, so I live in a very small apartment in Minneapolis. And my kids play with Somalians and hang out and talk, and we say hello and goodbye. And how I operate and communicate with the female Somalians is a little bit different than I do with the male Somalians because of their customs, and I respect that. But it's just realizing that we're all humans, we're all one, and seems like we're trying to figure out more ways to separate ourselves from one another. And it makes me worry. Now, I'm going to just read a couple quotes from Martin Luther King. Have we not come to such an impasse in the modern world that we must love our enemies or else? The chain reaction of evil, hate begets hate, wars producing more wars, must be broken, or else we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. These words are still true. Recently, I saw somebody who, not too recently, but in the past year, I saw someone who does work for global warming and go on a rant about Christians and just tear them to shreds. And this person's main focus is global warming. And I go, all right, well, you just cut off half your base. Do you not think that there's Christians who actually believe in global warming? But Jesus Christ, God damn it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. We don't have to agree with one another to love one another. If we want to sit down at the table, though, we have to show respect. Well, if they show me respect, that's not the Christian way. That's what separates a lot of us in faith traditions, is that we don't have that, well, you've got to show me respect for me to show you respect. No, that's not how that works. I'm sorry, everybody. You know, nonviolence doesn't work that way. And I was talking to this pastor who I was talking to about this and said, well, I'm more Malcolm X than I am Martin Luther King. And I'm like, well, you're more Malcolm X a few years before he died then. Because before Malcolm X was assassinated, he came to very, very similar conclusions that MLK came to and realized that we had to work together as brothers and sisters or all perish and die. You know, let's go to the final revelation. I'm like, I've read him too. I get it. Do I believe that we don't? Yes, we can argue. Yes, we can say, I've got to focus on this issue because I can't focus on every single issue in the world. Yes, I can say, I want to see this change by any means necessary. I want to see children taken care of. But I have to realize is that I got to think, are all children being taken care of? Just not these children are being taken care of. You know, so we all have to be a community and work together. So this one person who's going, well, I'm conservative, Jay, and I'm worried about all these people. I'm like, well, thank God you're worried about all these people because all these people weren't even on my radar. And now they are. And now I go like, oh, I feel bad because I didn't even think about them. I didn't think about the little kids that are sleeping on the floors right here. All I thought was about my brothers and sisters at the border. And now my worry has gotten even bigger. And it's hard, and it is overwhelming, and it is heartbreaking, and it is devastating, and it makes it hard to get out of bed in the morning. And it makes it hard to focus. And it makes you want to just not give a damn. I just want to go watch a movie. You know, like, you just find a good movie and just shut it all down. Dr. King said we must live together as brothers or perish together as fools. I believe this. This is all new for me, to be honest with you. I'm going to read a little bit from, I'm going to read 2 or 3 more things, and then we'll be done. I brought this talk here honestly to you guys because I want to test it out. I'm like a comedian now. I take my act to a couple places before I take it really on the road. And so this is actually my first time working on this one. And I'm not one to usually work on talks. I usually never do the same talk twice unless it's Galatians, which I do a billion times. But I'm going to share with you a little bit about from my friend Peter Rollins' book, The Divine Magician. And Pete Rollins was my best friend for years, but I've only recently got into his work. Don't tell him, though. That little Irish head of his will just swell. That's how you love each other in Ireland, is you give each other a hard time. In order to destroy the scapegoat mechanism, a different strategy must be adopted. Instead of trying to create a community where there is no outsider, and I hate to tell you this, safe space is no outsider. And church is not a safe space and never should be a safe space, period. If you want a safe space, go to an AA meeting, create a support group, do those things. You'll still get triggers, but church will never be a safe place, and nor should it ever be. Strategies must be adopted instead of trying to create a community where there is no outsider. The real answer lies in understanding that there is a sense in which all are outsiders. In concrete terms, the meaning of the community faces its our own lack, rather than ignoring it and thus creating scapegoats who must carry it. See, what we're seeing is we realize our own lack. Their own lack of, okay, I can only focus right now on kids at the border, and I can't focus on all these other suffering children, so I have a lack here. So I have to, rather than try to say, you're bad, I need to go like, I'm human, and you're human. And it really hurts to do that. I honestly, to go super conservative or super liberal is so much easier. It's like when I believed in biblical literalism. You know, and I was like, oh, Jesus got it taken care of. I don't have any questions. It's all right here. Got the book. I'm very happy. You know, now I look back, I'm like, I can't believe I ever thought that way. But man, it did feel really, really good. Certainty is a really nice vibe, you know, to like, oh, I'm right, you're wrong. So, I mean, you're all going to hell, and that really sucks, but I'm going to heaven, so it's pretty cool. And I'm really sad that you're going to hell, but let me tell you about grace so you don't go there. You know? And I don't believe in that anymore. But the projection of lack occurs when a group seeks solidarity by sharing a hatred of some external group that is directly blamed for their sense of dissatisfaction. So it must be my dad's fault. Because, I mean, he is super Trumpy. I can honestly tell you, if it wasn't for Jim Bakker, and I will take Tammy Faye out of the equation right now for a second. The beloved Tammy Faye, I will take my mom and put her over here for a second and say if I had only been raised by my father alone, I would still be sitting in this room. Because he taught me that love was the most important value I could have. Both my parents taught me that. My dad taught me never to speak ill of anyone and to love everybody. You know, he would have guys who I would write books about him and say horrible things about him and have gone to the news media and given horrible interviews about him, and he would have them from dinner, and I would say, you are an idiot when I was a teenager. What the hell are you doing? You just got out of prison, and you're sharing a table with this guy who said A, B, C, or D, because I could not forget any of that horrible stuff because it felt like such horrible rejection. And he said, son, you have to forgive people. You have to love them. And they say it like that. Go ahead and listen to him on the show. You'll hear that voice. Probably saying something that really pisses you off. So global warming is probably going to end the world anyway, so my dad was actually kind of right about the world ending, so you might want to order some of that stuff pretty fast if you want a few extra months. The projection of lack occurs whenever a group seeks solidarity by sharing hatred of some external group that is directly blamed for a sense of dissatisfaction. Such a group gains its identity from sharing a common enemy. However, it is possible to have a community that owns its lack. And Pete put this in here, and I like this, even though he has no idea about this group. One example is Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been in it for how old am I now? 23 years, and you own your lack. I'm an alcoholic. I'm powerless over alcohol. You own it. You mess up, you go in that room, you say, I went out and drank, and I just gave up 23 years of sobriety. And what do? They clap and give you a white coin and say, keep coming back, buddy. You own it. There's no scapegoating. We've scapegoated our conservative brothers and sisters. Let's not do the same thing to them that they did to us. We have seen laws pass. We've seen communities built. We've seen the world change and become a different place. And I think a lot of the hard things for me is I think for young people, we don't talk to them enough about things that have changed and things that have happened. Because I go, oh, call me this, and say this, and if you don't, you're out. No, you got to see what got us here so you could ask to be called this. Do you know how long it took, what is a cis straight male or cis? I still don't quite understand that. And I was a huge ally, and I can't even keep LGBTQ, and now there's A, and then there's another one, and another one. I'm having a rough time keeping up. I also tried to kill myself a few times this past year, and it was in a mental hospital, and have had to raise 2 kids. And I've realized the reality of life, and I'm luckily surrounded by people in the LGBTQ, and all the other ones, who love me and care enough about me to be cool. You know, I also have atheists come speak at my church now. Because I don't know if I believe in God or I don't believe in God half the time anymore. It's really a mystery to me. I don't know. I don't know anymore. Things change. You see, I have a very free flow style. I don't know where we're going. I honestly am dying to my flesh as I stand up here. Because I want to scapegoat really bad. I want to call my dad and yell at him. I want to say, yeah, let me get there and make those protest signs for Shane. He should have come out as affirming by now. I don't want to sit up here and defend the fact that sometimes people's progress is slower than others' people's progress, and that we're all human beings going through experiences that we have no idea what they're like. I think, should we hold each other accountable? Yes. But we should be able to willing to argue well and not write each other off and not cancel one another out. Amen. There's 3 things that remain: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. But you still have faith and you still have hope. And we hope is for the other as well. Hope and grace are tied together. They are just inseparable. Love is the only force capable of turning an enemy into a friend, Dr. King said. And do we believe it or don't we believe it? Honestly, I'd much rather just... honestly, my plan was to come here and do a real brief Galatians sermon. And then it just kept falling on my heart to talk about scapegoating and new stuff and try something new here and just go with it, so damn it. That's Tammy Faye for you. Damn it, Jim. You know how many times I heard that growing up? I started to think that was my dad's actual name. As a kid. Nowadays, my mom would not probably be as accepted as she was, because she never came out as full affirming. So if she got invited to Wild Goose, they'd probably protest her. And you know how many gay people I've had come up to me in tears about my mom and said this saved her life? You know how many times I've used Shane's example of Shane Claiborne talking to Franklin Graham in my sermons in the past few months? Probably every Sunday I spoke. Because I can't do it. I don't have the finances to do it. When they're all going, we're going to the border to protest, I'm like, great. If you want to send me some money so I can fly out to the border, I'd love to do that. I can't do it, but Shane can. Shane turns freaking rifles into gardening equipment. I mean, I'm not a hippie, and I'm like, oh, that's cute. But he's doing something powerful. But we write it all off. I love to hear you guys talking good things about Wild Goose. Because honestly, I had a horrible experience. I got another nail in my career's coffin. I have always pushed boundaries, and I hate that I do that. But I've always just had to speak out. I guess it was all that I'm afraid to have confrontation in my marriage, so I'll just go to Wild Goose and have all the confrontation I can get. I'll just push it down, and then when I'm in front of a group of people, I'll just let it rip. So maybe I'll calm down in my old age. That would be really nice, because honestly, I would just like to be a little bit relaxed, and I'd like to have some more speaking engagements. I'd like to have my career back, which I feel like I'm slowly building, but it's taking time. It does take a village. I don't care. I'm going to where I bring a watch with me when I speak. What we're faced with in the conversions of Saul, this is Pete Rollins again, the possibility of community dedicated to the undermining of a system that would seek to enshrine equality. When Paul writes of a community where there is no longer Jew or Gentile, male or female, slave or free, he is describing a collective where the identities are drained of their operative power and where everyone has equal access to the universal. This is not a new system, but rather a way of living out a system that is one already inhabits. Paul introduces a truly shattering alternative to the system of his day in which everything was ordered in strict hierarchy. He directly connects this new approach with Christ crucified. He says, for crucifixion describes one who was stripped of all identity. Listen to this. To be crucified meant to be robbed of one's political and religious status. The person being executed was no longer a citizen and was considered cursed of God. Thus, to identify with someone on a cross was to identify with someone who has been robbed of their identity. Now, if I preach this in a conservative church, they're going to go, amen. If I go to my more progressive churches and preach this, they're going to go, wait a second, my identity is like this, and if you don't call me this pronoun, we're all done. I'm not talking about my transgender brothers and sisters. But I'm talking about it's gotten wild out there. It's the Wild West. And we're done. But if I have no identity but my identity in Christ, I am no longer conservative. I am no longer Republican or Democrat. Now, I will tell you this, that I use neither male nor female for my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and for my fight for equality, I use that verse 1 billion times. Now I'm having to use that verse in a way I'm very uncomfortable with. To say that there's not Republican or Democrat. To say there's no Jew or Gentile was to basically say there's no black or white. This would be a good time to become an atheist and just throw the Bible out. Because, folks, this is not an easy answer. This is not an easy thing to do. You're saying we have no identity. We are humans. We are, and then forget it, because it says we're one in Christ later, and then then you're like, oh, we're all one in Christ. Well, what does that mean, and what does that say? And then are we not supposed to have interfaith dialogue and saying, of course we're supposed to have interfaith dialogue. Some of this stuff in here we just ignore and we just move on and we try to grow. Paul did. Jesus was a cherry picker. Jesus would quote the scripture and leave scriptures out. Paul would take 2 or 3 different verses and quote them as though they were one. Neither one of those guys would be seen as really great public speakers, and would definitely be seen as heretics, and definitely be seen as cherry pickers. They were both cherry pickers because they saw an evolution happening. When Jesus came, you've heard it said, but I say, he's completely changing the law. Did Jesus break the law? Yeah, he broke it, and he changed it. Jesus was sinless. Well, not in the eyes of the Pharisees, not in the eyes of his own tradition. Just by sitting down where he sat, he was committing a sin. You can say, oh no, Jay, that was just breaking the law. Breaking the law was sinning, folks. It's that easy. Paul introduces a truly shared alternative system. Today, everything was ordered, strict hierarchy. He directly connects the new approach with Christ crucified. Okay, we already read that part. To be crucified with Christ thus speaks of breaking strict identity markers. This doesn't mean that people no longer have identities, okay? So don't worry. I'm not trying to tell us that we can't be these and thems and all that stuff, but they now hold them in such a way that they no longer define the scope of limitations of their lives. A new conflict arises, not between different groups, but between those who are open to change and those who hold stubbornly to their tribal identities. The radical church finds itself in a world and yet no longer of it. It remains a part of a wider society with all its hierarchies and yet fundamentally questions these hierarchies. Paul describes this new community as made up of those who are trash of the world. I mean, I liked much better being a social justice warrior than trying to tell you guys that you need to love your conservative brothers and sisters. It's really tough. I have a hard time loving my conservative dad. I have a really hard time forgiving my ex. There's a lot of pain there. It's really tough. What I'm asking you to do is not easy, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. For me, I've had to read books that made me so uncomfortable, and reading books by philosophers and books by psychoanalysts, and having long conversations with my buddy who has a doctorate in philosophy. And really seek this out. And it's taken a lot of work to kind of get to this point of saying, okay, I have a really hard time now identifying with them. If I could get off, if my job didn't require me to be on social media, and people say, well, pictures of your kids and talking about suicide, is that your job? Yes, that's my job. My job is transparency. My parents put a camera in front of me when I was born. The world knew I was born before my dad did, about 3 seconds, because it said, it's a boy, it's a boy, it's a boy, flashing on the screen, and my dad was just standing there talking, and all of a sudden he looks down at the one of the televisions and goes, "Whoa!" And I got, because my dad was busy being on TV while I was busy, my mom was busy giving birth. What does that tell you? Anyway, yeah, welcome to my world. But no, my life is transparency. My life is my stories. My life is of the gospel, and understanding the gospel is through being a human being. People have called me haphazardly human, and that's what I am. I'm just a flawed, crazy, unique individual. I am Tammy Faye's son. I just have less glamour. Yeah, I've got my own, what do they call it? Flair. Bling and flair and all that, My mom once said that my tattoos were my makeup. She's right, because it's a shield, folks. But my mom could do this thing, too, where she could go on TBN, people that treated her wrong and hard at one time, and do an interview with the Crouches, and then go to a gay pride parade and lead everybody, and yes, Jesus loves me, and that where we lays the contradictions. There's such a contradiction there, and she could tell me that she was going to vote for someone conservative, and I would sit down and say, well, Mom, this is why I don't think you should vote for this conservative person. But she could do all that and live in a tension and live in the contradiction that is America. And I hope we can learn to live in the contradiction. And I hope we can learn to not shame each other and shame people and really celebrate when people change. And I'm going to challenge you, too. I don't know why, because you have a very strong personality, but I want you to celebrate when people change. You might already do that. I don't know you well enough, but I can see what God's calling you to do, and it's something really powerful. Now, that's about as evangelical as I'm going to get today. And Pastor, I've come here very broken man and trying to get my life back together, and you telling me that my life had a part of changing your life is like fuel to live by. So thank you for that. Because God damn, life is hard. We're all suffering. Suffering is such a part of life. And we just don't realize what each other are going through. We've got to show more compassion. And I think of my dad going through a divorce of the woman he loved the most while he's sitting in prison. And the fact that he's still alive, and maybe he's crazy. I don't know. I don't know what's gone on with my dad and why he's gone the way he has. But in some ways I can't. What do I say? Thank God you're alive. Thank God that my kids have at least one grandparent alive. I'm going to leave you with the words of Paul, our good friend Paul the Apostle. I'm very Paulinian. It's always shocked people. I remember I was a part of a group for a while called the Red Letter Christians. And I was like, but Paul. And, they were like, well, Paul says some weird shit. And I'm like, yeah, he does, but I don't understand grace without Paul. Paul told me what Jesus was. So I was like, I'm a red and black letter Christian because I'm so holy. I just would have never understood Jesus if it wasn't for the Apostle Paul. If it wasn't for the book of Galatians, I'd be done. So I'm going to read from Galatians. And he goes, for you are called, in Galatians 5:13, for you are called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves. You hear this? Through this love become slaves to one another. Not a choice word for the time. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Doesn't even say anything about God here. It's so funny how little Paul talks about Jesus' life. It's very strange to me. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. Did you hear that? Galatians 5:15. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. We are consuming one another, and we're allowing politics to do it. And to be honest with you, when we hate Trump's supporters, I think you're letting Trump win. When we argue about a lot of this stuff and throw each other out, we forget about the children. We forget about children at the borders. We forget about those in the foster system. We forget about those in war-torn countries. We forget about those in Ethiopia. We forget about those things. And I understand now why even someone like Franklin Graham, who I can't stand, and then works with kids overseas and helps them, and it's like, God, I just wish he would help people over here, And it took Shane to see that, and Shane was saying, can you do this here? And obviously they didn't. But the fact is, okay, there's some good here. And it's like that end scene in Empire and Return of the Jedi, and Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are fighting, and their father and son, and they're fighting to the death, and Luke is like, I still feel good in him. There's still some good in him. There's still some good there. And ultimately, the father saves the son, and then the son says, I don't want you to die. I want to save you. I want you to live. And he goes, you already have. Let me see you with my own eyes. I'm going to die anyway. You've saved me. And to really honest with you, that's grace, and it sucks because honestly, let's remember Darth Vader killed a bunch of little younglings, little Jedis, baby Jedis, kids, and he gets off easy with just helping his son out once. But grace is the contradiction. And I'm going to point out one more contradiction because I love this verse so much that I have to share the contradiction right here. If you go up I just read for you Galatians 5 through 15, okay? But if you read Galatians 5, 13 through 15, but if you read 12, Galatians 12 says, I wish those who were unsettling you would castrate themselves. Okay? So Paul goes from saying, I wish my enemies would cut their balls off, to be careful of biting and devouring one another because you may be consumed by each other. Do you see the contradiction, folks? There it is. So get comfortable in it and realize that we all live there. I love this church, and I love all you folks, and thanks for having me, and thanks for going through all this heaven and hell and ups and downs with me. And don't start playing me off. I mean, that just came to me, that how far things have come in the 14 years. I can't believe it. I can't believe the fact that I honestly don't have to fight constantly for LGBTQ equality. Like that my LGBTQ friends are doing the fight. That I don't have to show up half the time anymore. You know, I'm glad to show up. If they go, hey, Jay, we need you here. Damn it, I'm the first one there. I'll make a way where there is no way. But man, things have changed. And one of the things that constants in these stories is, in your story, in my story, is this little purple room. You know, Randy and Cheryl and Gary and Peggy, golly, Peggy was like, I remember that the first time I saw Peggy, I was sitting over there and I was like, there's Moses. And and you all definitely caused me, and do you want to know, I mean, I was supposed to speak at, what is it called? Exodus. And Randy didn't stop talking to me because I was speaking at Exodus. Peggy thought, well, maybe we were wrong about Jay. You told me that. And and you just kept talking away to me. And here I am. So, never give up. Never lose faith. Always be hopeful. Endure through every circumstance. And don't bite and devour one another. If Randy had been petty with me on the phone, if Randy had been angry and hurt, and I understand anger and hurt and pain more than most people. I understand it. Had not done that, I wouldn't be here. You know, I mean, I remember going home and telling my board and watching my board explode in front of me. Saying, oh, we're gay affirming now. What? You know, they just split down the middle. It was really fun. But it was patience and just knowing how to take the right moment. And I have a self-destructive tendency in my career, and knowing when to use it for good. You know, knowing when to use even what is not the safest thing, knowing to use that and say, okay, I'm going to take this part, I'm going to take this, God, I've got to get off this medication so I can remember my words. I've got to take this contradiction and use it right. And there's a way to do that. So I hope we can love each other more. I hope we can defend one another more. I hope we can stand up one another more. And I hope we can love our enemies more, because they may be our enemies. They may genuinely be our enemies, and they may genuinely be hurting others and what they're doing and what they're saying. But I hope that we'll stop writing articles that say, you know, I hope we'll stop questioning each other's salvation. I think that's bullshit. I don't even know what salvation is anymore. And I hope we'll not write off all of our conservative brothers and sisters. I hope we can figure out a way to communicate with them. I hope we'll stop scapegoating and we look at our own issues in our own lives and we're able to grow and become peacemakers. Thank you.
Life has taught me this. Every day is new. And if anything is true, all faced with what we lack, some things fall apart, but from the ashes new dreams start. All that matters to the heart is how we love. How we love. How we love. From the smallest act of kindness, in a word, a smile, a touch, in spite of our mistakes, chances come again. If we lose or if we win, all that matters in the end is how we love. Sometimes we forget, trying to be so strong in this world of right and wrong. All that matters when we've gone, all that matters all along, all we have that carries on is how we love. I need you, you need me. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me, agree with me. We're all a part of God's body. It is God's will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive. How we love. How we love. I will not forget your kindness when I needed it so much. Sometimes we forget, trying to be strong in this world of right and wrong. All that matters when we've gone, all that really mattered all along, all we have carry on is how we love.
All right. How we love. That's what I got out of Jay's talk today. It's all about love. We have a short time for lunch, and we've got it prepared. Thank you to Sissy and for James for helping me with that. And just help yourself. We are all blessed. Somebody said, "Don't you say grace?" I said, "I live in grace." So we are living in grace today. So just help yourself. We've got chicken salad and lunch meat and chips and dip. So enjoy. God bless. And